Hey guys, so today I wanted to review a couple of lesser known contracts that are put out by the Texas Association of Realtors, who is really who puts out most of our contracts that we use, thank God. But I want to review a couple of them because I think that they will provide beneficial to you during some of your transactions. So just as a refresher on how you get to zip forms, at least how I get to zip forms, you can get to it from the association's website for sure, but I usually just go to Matrix and go to this little hyperlink down here, zip forms login, and it will take you to here. All right, and I'm going to call out the numbers to these contracts, and because sometimes it's easier to search for them by number than they are by name, especially if you choose this pick box and you click all. There are just a ton of different things you can get, right? So to make the search easier, I'm going to tell you where they are. They are already in Texas Association of Realtors, which is TXR. And I just say, okay, well, give me TXR form dash, in this case, the first one we're going to review is 1417. And this pulls this guy up, representation disclosure. All right, so let's pull up a copy of this and let's just walk through this real quick. So this is just a formal way to disclose to clients who you represent. Now, you might be wondering, well, we already have a buyer's representation agreement. We already have a listing agreement that creates the relationship of agency. Why would we need this one? Well, this is going to be used when you represent multiple buyer clients who are interested in the same property. You might use this for investors who are also interested in the same property, and or open house clients who are also interested in the same property. Okay, so does everyone understand what I mean by that? So let's say that you have just a killer open house and 15 couples walk through, and you sign 5 of those 15 up to work with you. And let's say that 2 of those couples are actually interested in that open house. And let's say that the open house is not your listing, just to simplify things, because that would get real muddy, right? So how can you possibly represent 2 clients that are interested in the same property? All right, so think about that process for a moment. You have 2 clients at the very exact same time that are interested at 123 Main Street, and you take each client through the exact same steps. They both go to show it. You haven't disclosed anything yet, but they both go to show to go see it. You've given them the IABS, and then things kind of start to get serious. They've both seen it separately. They don't know each other. They don't know that you're working with separate clients. And they both at the same time express interest that they want to present an offer. Okay? So you will then be privy to information that would kind of put you in an unethical situation. Now, it's not illegal to represent 2 clients that are interested in the same property, but it is a slippery slope when it comes to ethics for the reasons I just described. You're going to be privy to information that you wouldn't normally be exposed to for each client. So would it be easy for you to suggest to one client to offer something because you know that your other client is going to offer something else? And I think the answer is yes. It would be very easy to get yourself into that situation And then what happens if you didn't disclose that you're working with two clients that are interested in the same property, and all of a sudden that gets out? 3 words: instant lawsuit. Okay, so you want to present this disclosure up front. And so it simply says to, and that would be each of your clients separately. So there would be 2 documents if you used my example. To Sarah Jones from Jane Doe from XYZ Brokerage concerning the property at 123 Main Street. Texas law requires a real estate agent license holder who represents a party in a proposed real estate transaction to disclose orally or in writing. Now let me just stop right there. I know it says or orally or in writing, but where I come from, if it's only spoken and not written, that conversation never existed. Let's move on. That representation at the license holder's first contact with either another party to the transaction or another license holder who represents another party to the transaction. This almost implicitly says, let's be clear, I represent the following. Either you represent the seller or, in my example, the buyer. Okay, so you would put the other buyer's name. Now, if you'll notice that there are 2 spots for a signature. So both parties have to agree to this. Okay, so if they both agree that you represent 2 separate parties that are interested in the same home, they have to acknowledge that, and acknowledge that, again, you would be exposed to information that you normally wouldn't be exposed to. And I would make it very clear that, I don't see how I can fairly represent both of you at the same time. And so what happens in that regard? So if you just don't feel comfortable doing that, even if both of them say it's okay, or one signs the document and the other party doesn't, then you have to do something. And so the easiest thing to do is to give that person to another agent and collect a referral fee. Now, I would make very sure that they are heart set on getting this home, because at the end of the day, the home can only sell to one person. So someone's going to lose. Now, that being said, I would make sure that their heart is set on that property, because if they still want you to represent them, then they may say, oh, well, you know what, I will just look for another home. But obviously, you present this document when things start to get to a point where you're going to have to provide advice and guidance to that buyer that you can't possibly ethically provide if you don't disclose this. Okay? So this comes into play when you represent multiple clients who are interested in the same property, be it investors, be it open house clients, be it whomever. Okay? All right, so let's move on to the second form, which is similar in nature. And this is really used for sale by owners. So I get the question frequently with regards to, well, what if I represent a buyer and they want to go see a FSBO? A lot of realtors just throw up their arms and say, that's going to turn out badly. They never want to pay realtors, yada, yada, yada. What if you represent them, the FSBO, at some point? You convince them to list with you, and they say something crazy like, all right, well, you guys have been bugging me. I'll give you a shot. Or yeah, you can do an open house for me, or you can represent me as the seller if, it's my neighbor. And that's a common occurrence. So FSBO knows the neighbor down the street. Her house has been on the market for 60 days. Neighbors expressed interest. FSBO doesn't know how to do contracts and he wants to hire you to represent him if the buyer is this neighbor and if our only assistance is to write the contracts and, kind of sort of represent them as the seller. Very situational, right? So how do we ensure that we get paid? Well, it's through this document. And by the way, this is TXR form TXR-2401. If you ever wonder where I'm getting these numbers, they're on the bottom of every page. So let's go down here. Here we go. Okay, TX-2401. So let's just go through this very, very briefly. I'll highlight the finer points, right? So you are registering you as the, I know it says broker, but it's broker salesperson, with the owner, the FSBO, right? So here's the owner, John Doe at 123 Main Street. Here's the broker, Jane Doe with XYZ Realty. Property address, self-explanatory. Asking price, self-explanatory. Or the lease price, right? So there's a provision in this document for whether or not it's a sale, a lease, or a sale that may become a lease. Okay? Registration, broker registers blank, that's the prospect, your client, okay, with the owner. Now it could be John Doe, the owner. You could put the owner's name in here, and I'll show you why that's okay to do in a second. But typically this is going to be when you represent a buyer. So broker registers Sally Smith, prospect, with the owner. Term, this agreement begins on whenever that conversation starts getting serious, I would suggest whenever the offer is made and accepted. Okay? Ends on whenever the closing date is. Okay? Broker's fee. Owner is not obligated to pay broker a fee until such time as broker's fee is earned and payable. Broker's fees are earned when owner enters into a binding agreement to sell or lease all or part of the property at any price to prospect, or if owner breaches this agreement. Broker's fees are payable in the amount stated below at the specified time. So language not unlike a listing agreement. Sales. If owner agrees to sell all or part of the property to prospect at any price on or before the date this agreement ends, owner will pay broker a fee equal to, and you put whatever that fee is. If it's a commission percentage, put the commission percentage. If it's a flat fee, mark checkbox B and put the flat fee. Okay, this fee is payable either during the term of this agreement or after its termination at the earlier of A, the closing and funding of the sale or exchange of the property, B, owner's breach of this agreement, or C, owner's breach of a binding contract to sell the property to the prospect. Okay, so again, language very similar to a listing agreement. So page 2 addresses whether or not it's a lease. If it were a lease, you would, fill in the blanks there. But here's where you determine who you're representing. Broker's representation. Owner acknowledges receipt of the attached information about brokerage services. So it's not just this contract. You got to present the IABS as well, which is incorporated into this agreement for all purposes. During negotiations for the sale or lease of the property, broker, pick one of these two, I'm going to say. I don't want us to be doing intermediary. Okay, so this agreement, you either represent the owner, either the FSBO in my example, or the prospect only. Only. Okay, so what is this? This is a written agreement that binds the FSBO to paying you. Okay, so this is like the listing agreement or a buyer's rep agreement. Why do we have this? Because somewhere, sometime, there was probably an oral agreement or maybe it was written, where a FSBO agreed to pay commission to an agent and they welched. They did not pay that commission. Okay, this creates agency. Okay, this creates a commitment by the FSBO to pay us. Does it prevent the FSBO from flaking and not paying us? No, it does not. No, it does not. But it is the closest thing we have to a binding listing agreement or a binding buyer's rep agreement to get us paid. Theoretically, even if you had a binding listing agreement, a seller could opt not to pay. In which case could be lawsuit time to get a commission. They were contractually bound to paying that. They didn't pay it. They have to suffer the consequences. We are typically not in that position, but just as an explanation as to why we have this document. Okay, so you would use this whenever you have a FSBO. This is a registration between you and the FSBO. Last form, notice of information from other sources. So, are there sources of data or information during a transaction that you get elsewhere? Okay, and what do I mean by that? If you represent a buyer and that buyer pays an inspection company to do an inspection, and that buyer pays that company, whose inspection is that? It's the buyer's, right? So that is not an outside source. That is a source by which the buyer paid a vendor to provide them something, and the vendor provided it. What would be an outside source is if you represented that same buyer and the buyer put in an offer on a home, and that home had already been under contract but is now back on the market because that first deal fell through, and the homeowner has a prior inspection. And that inspection is disclosed. It is given to us because it has to be, by the way. I mentioned that in another video that I've done. But it's from an outside source. And so, is it probable that the buyer's inspection that they paid for is going to reveal things that that first inspection didn't, and vice versa? The answer is yes. Is it likely for that buyer to make inferences from both of those documents? One's from an outside source, one's from a source that they paid for. The answer is yes, it is. That's human nature. If inspection 1 that I didn't pay for revealed a rat's nest in the, figuratively speaking, a rat's nest of wires connecting to various sources in a junction box in the wall, but the one I paid for did not, am I going to look at that first one more closely? Yes, I would. But it's an outside source. So the same thing goes for an appraisal. The same thing goes for an appraisal's or an appraiser's assessment of square footage. Square footage is a big one. It can come from many different sources. It can come from a builder, even though it's not a new build. It could come from the tax records. It could come from the owner. It could come from an actual appraiser. Okay? How about tax records themselves? Yes. How about repair records? Yes. If you represent a buyer who's buying a home and they get, same goes for warranties, and they get a receipt for a serviced HVAC unit 2 years prior that said that they replaced the compressor, that's an outside source. Okay? So why is that a big deal in that example? Well, because they may say that they replaced the compressor, but did they? Number one, there's a piece of paper saying they did, but did they? Or number two, did they just repair the one that they had? Or did they replace it with a refurbished compressor? I have no idea, and neither does the buyer. So in order to cover yourselves, TAR has created a form called Notice of Information from Other Sources. Okay? And this is whenever you obtain an outside a piece of information from an outside source that is relevant to the transaction. And I've given you 5 or 6 already. Okay? But as a rule of thumb, this would cover any data source that the buyer did not pay for themselves, like an inspection report. If they paid for a survey, not an outside source, but they're going to get a survey from the seller. And so, is that an outside source? Yes. It also deems boundaries and encroachments. So that is a big deal. So whenever we get information from an outside source, I would suggest using this form. And so let's just read through this. To XYZ client, John Doe, right? From Jane Smith at XYZ Realty regarding property at 123 Main Street. Broker has obtained the attached information identified as, so let's say it's prior inspection report. Where did we get it from? XYZ Inspection Company. Okay. Broker has relied on the attached information and does not know and has no reason to know that the information is false or inaccurate except, and if you know something, put it in there. Okay. Broker does not warrant or guarantee the accuracy of the attached information. Do not rely on the attached information without verifying its accuracy. Okay. So if you get a survey for an outside source, a previous inspection, a source that isn't reliable with regards to square footage, a prior appraisal, any kind of tax assessments, you're going to get MUD disclosures, things that tell you what the taxes are for MUDs and PIDs. Those are outside sources. And actually, those are 2 biggies. Those are 2 big ones that end a deal real quick because someone didn't disclose that there was an extra $150 a month, as an example, to someone's monthly payment, and all of a sudden they don't want to pay it or they don't qualify to pay it. Okay? So you can kind of see why this document is important. Why? Because who do they blame? The realtor / broker sometimes. Okay, you should have known. You should have told me. I should have been made aware. Okay, so this is why it's important that at whatever juncture you get an additional piece of information, you have them sign this document. Okay, and that is TXR form 2502, as stated right here. Okay, all right. Those are 3 documents that not a lot of people either know about or have reason to use, but I would use them, and I would add this representation disclosure into your buyer's template. I would add this registration agreement between broker and owner into both your buyer and seller template, and I would enter notice of information from other sources into your buyer's template so that you always have them whether you need to use them or not. All right, so I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, just reach out and I will talk to you next time.